ago about it, and I was so excited because it's just something we don't get to do. So we've got Theo to speak to you. And
Cool. In a way, am I?
All right, take it away, Theo.
All right. Thank you all so much. Good morning. Thanks for coming up and seeing my talk about video games QA. So I've been here once before last year as an attendee, and now this is my first time speaking. So very exciting. Having a great morning so far. Hope you all are as well. So yeah, my name is Theo Clarke. I'm Senior QA Analyst at Red Kite Games, which is a Leeds-based games company up on Park Row. It's a company of about 70 people, specialising in ports for games, co-development and contracted games from AAA developers and things like that. So I've got about 5 years experience in the industry, just over 5 years. I've also got a master's degree in game design from UCLan in Lancashire. So I hope you think I'm qualified to deliver this information to you today. So yeah, as I say, I'm Senior Quality Analyst is my full job title at Red Kite. Been there since June 2022. I was previously at a company called Invincible Studio for several years. They're based in Preston, they make football games. And then I started out at TT Fusion, which is Traveller's Tales, based in Cheshire, which make the Lego video games. So I've got my name in several credits over the years. The first one being Lego Star Wars, which was a massive get for me because I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. And then Lego Dimensions. The Soccer Manager series, that was at Invincible Studio, and that is a sort of yearly released mobile and PC free-to-play football management game. I always used to say it's like Football Manager, but better. And then obviously I've done several projects at Red Kite, which are all under NDA, so I can't share any details of, unfortunately. So over that 5+ years, I've experienced basically every kind of games testing you can imagine. So like exploratory and destructive testing, conducting daily smoke tests, regression and confirming bug fixes and so on. I've also done a bit of sort of platform and compliance testing. And that's across basically all the different platforms, done the last 3 generations of games consoles, PlayStation and Xbox, Nintendo consoles, PC, and then mobile as well. And then aside from all that, I'm also a bit of an independent game developer on the side, and a Game Jam host. Game Jam, for anyone who doesn't know, is a short-term challenge where teams get together over the course of, let's say, a weekend and like create a game based around a theme. It's always chaotic and fun. And then a huge recent milestone for me was releasing my first indie game on Xbox and PC called Picklepocalypse, which is a very goofy game. I'll just show you a quick video of it now. It should work. There we go. So it's a top-down 2D zombie shooter game, but the zombies are all pickles. And the goal is you're a cucumber and you don't want them to pickle you. So obviously it's very small, very goofy. It was just me and my girlfriend who made it. She did all the artwork and the voice acting. And then I did all of the coding, and I was sort of learning to code whilst doing it, which was a very interesting experience. But my QA brain managed to make it all look really polished on the surface, but I'm not a coder, so underneath it's a bit of a mess, but it looks good on the surface, I hope. And then we've taken that to several events around the country. We went to Insomnia Gaming Festival in Birmingham recently, and it was played by hundreds, if not thousands of people coming by our booth all weekend. So yeah. That's our silly little game that we made. And then moving on, I'll tell you what to expect in this talk then. So I'm going to be doing quite a high level sort of introduction about video games QA. I've given sort of the lowdown of what we do day to day, our normal tasks and challenges and things that we tackle throughout the day. And then highlighting key differences between software and web QA and video games QA. Because I imagine, does anyone work in games QA in here? No? Okay, strap in. And then I'll be giving the pros and cons of games QA versus software and web as well. And then finally, if anyone's interested in learning more or trying to break into this themselves, I'll be giving some advice and resources, pointing you in the right direction on how to do that. And then hopefully we've got time for questions as well. So what does a games tester do? For the most part, It is very comparable, very similar to software QA in terms of the general tasks, exploratory testing, following test plans, reporting bugs, and then tracking them through the fixing process and confirming the fixes at the end. So yeah, we do daily smoke tests to gauge the viability of general testing throughout the day. We normally get a build of whatever project it is sort of spat out overnight, and then it's QA's job in the morning to smoke test that. It takes around an hour. And then obviously we do general testing. Destructive testing is what I like to call it, also known as exploratory or ad hoc testing, which is where we just manually test certain areas of the game. So if it's a game with 10 vehicles, we'll test each one of them. Can you get into the vehicle? Can you get out of the vehicle? Can you drive it? Can you shoot out of it? Can you shoot it? Can you explode it? And all this, depending on whatever the project is. And then we also do regression testing, which I believe in games we use that term slightly differently, which is that we refer to regression testing as checking fixes for previously reported bugs rather than retesting a whole thing. And then we also obviously create and update and follow test plans, so smoke test documents on a daily basis, what we call UATs, user acceptance tests, which is testing normally a certain feature or feature set against the expected behavior, and then reporting any bugs that we find whilst doing that. And then FTC, full test checklist, is sort of the largest scale test that we'll do, and it's basically checking absolutely everything that exists within the game against the expected behavior, and it can take several testers, hours, days, even up to a week to do that. And then outside of the general bug finding and reporting, we are usually the ones who help conduct play tests. So quite often you'll throw the game out to the wider team, so the developers and publishers and so on, and like get lots of player numbers on it if it's a multiplayer game, and then sort of focus groups, and you might have external people and publishers and stuff coming in to look at it. Say if it's a third-party game and you're doing work on it for a larger games developer, we get things ready for them to see and make sure they're up to scratch. And then a lot of the tools you may have already heard of. The two main ones are Unity Engine and Unreal Engine. So a huge percentage of the games that you'll find on the market these days are made in one of these two engines, especially indie games. But then a lot of the bigger companies have their own in-house engines that they make and maintain themselves. And then I'm sure you all know about Jira. It's what we use to track bugs, look at tasks, close things off, all of that. And then Azure DevOps, it's very similar to Jira. We use Google Suite and sort of Microsoft Office quite a bit to, check design documentation, make and follow our test plans and so on. And then we use version control systems to make sure we've got all the latest changes, because things move quite quickly in game development. The game can look quite different in, Monday to the next Friday. Things can change quite a lot, so we have to make sure we've got everything up to date using GitHub and other version control systems. So now I'm going to highlight some of the key differences between games and software/web QA. So having never worked in software and web QA professionally, you may have to take this with a pinch of salt, because this is my outside view, really. And if there's anything you disagree with, let's have a discussion at the end. So there, as I've said before, there is still plenty of similarities in terms of, the day-to-day things and our approaches and practices. But one of the main things that is different is that Games QA generally uses a lot less automation. And there's several reasons for this. Probably the main one being that there's so much more you can do in games. Say you navigate in a 3D space with a 3D avatar, and there's loads of different weapons and vehicles and so on. There's so many different things that you can do. It's difficult to automate this. I think games can also lag behind in the uptake on automation, whereas software is really on the ball with that. We do use some automation, but it's few and far between, and it's quite often done by programmers themselves rather than by QA. And there's also dedicated, it's SDET, software developer, something. Engineering tests. Yeah, we do have those. And they're usually the ones who do the automated testing, but general sort of junior and mid-level games QA is all manual, pretty much. Another difference is that games companies can have really, really big QA departments, especially AAA ones. And unfortunately, games QA can be sort of much less integrated into the wider team. And that's kind of a stigma around them at certain companies where they're seen as like lesser employees in a way, which fortunately isn't the case at Red Kite Games where I work. So yeah, software and web quite often have smaller QA teams who are like a lot more integrated and embedded into the process. So yeah, moving on, here's some pros and cons I'm going to throw at you in rather confusing order, maybe. So games QA has the lowest barrier to entry pretty much of any position in the games industry. So if you're looking to get into the games industry, it's a really good place to start, or it can be, depending on the company and how things pan out. You don't particularly need any sort of formal qualification. You can get into it with no experience, with no degree or anything like that. You don't even need an ISTQB. I think I've met one person in Games QA in my entire career who had an ISTQB. You also don't particularly need coding skills, although that can help, and so can degrees and so on. But because of its accessibility, it can be some of the lowest paid work in the games industry. And as I've already touched on, it can be slightly undervalued or even disrespected, both within the industry and without. You always hear if a AAA game comes out and it bombs a bit, it's always QA who get the blame. But it can be a good foot in the door of the games industry for sure. That's kind of how I got into it in the first place. It was just my first games job, and I did intend to move out of it into something else, but then I just sort of found a love for it and I've stuck with it all this time. And you can also move into game design or production or programming roles from Games QA. It can also help you if you are looking to get into software and web and are struggling to manage that. Having some Games QA experience on the CV can definitely be a help with that as well. As you can probably imagine, with a lack of automation, it can be a little bit tedious and repetitive a lot of the time, because the automation is the exception and not the norm. You will find yourself doing the same few things, testing the same feature for hours or even days on end. And obviously this can negatively impact your enjoyment of games as a sort of recreational activity. It's one of the questions I get asked all the time when people find out what I do is like, do you still have time to play games? Do you still want to play games? And for me, the answer is yes, but I know some people where it has robbed the magic a little bit from them. And counterpoint to it helping you move into other positions in the industry, if you end up at the wrong company where they don't want to foster you and help you grow and things, it can be a bit dead end. And there is companies where they just sort of shove you in a room with the QA department and just forget about you, and they're not interested in helping you grow at all. But on the other hand, if you do find the right company, paying conditions can be very good. So I'm really lucky at Red Kite. I can't praise them enough for the way they treat their staff and pay their staff. It's really good. We only have 6 QA people, which is quite a small QA department really for a games company of Red Kite's size. I think generally you find the smaller the QA team, the better paid and treated they are. And then another con, which I find an interesting one, is you can find yourself feeling like it's less of a positive contribution to, I guess, society as a whole working on games, because they are just for recreation at the end of the day. Whereas if you're in software, you might be working on, let's say, a booking system in the healthcare service for like life-saving treatment or something like that, which is going to be very fulfilling, whereas, I just work on games. But at the end of the day, you get to work on video games, which is probably a lot of people's dream jobs. I know it was mine all my life. There's nothing else that I'd rather be doing. Which brings me on to, how do you actually manage to get into this? So I'll just throw some random tips and advice at you in terms of that. So luckily in Yorkshire, especially in Leeds, we're very lucky to have a really thriving game development community. Lots of industry around here. So obviously you've got Red Kite Games, where I work, that's on Park Row. Rockstar Games, they have a fairly large office in that direction somewhere, near the train station, I believe. You've also got XR Games, which is a VR games company, sort of in Kirkstall direction. They're growing massively at the moment, and they've got a QA department. And then there's also Just Add Water and Fat Kraken, sort of in the north side of the city centre. And then Cooperative Innovations, they're another VR company who do games, but they also do sort of business-to-business stuff. I think they're based near the train station, and then there is probably more Leeds-based companies that I've forgotten about. A little bit further afield, there's the Sumo Group, so they have offices all over. Red Kite is actually part of the Sumo Group. So they've got offices in Sheffield with a big QA department, Nottingham, Newcastle, Warrington, and then they've got a load more companies, studios down south. Team 17, they're a local games company based in Wakefield. They have a large QA department. They haven't always had the best reputation for the way they sort of treat and pay their QA, so be careful with them, I suppose. Rebellion North, they've got an office in Wakefield, and then obviously you've got your tech hubs and games hubs in Manchester, Liverpool, and Sheffield, and the larger North. Some remote games jobs do exist, but they're less common than, say, programming and design jobs. A lot of the time it's just because of hardware. It's difficult to work fully remote if you need like an Xbox dev kit sat on your desk. So moving on to the skills, as I've mentioned already, Unity and Unreal game engines, they are absolutely massive in the games industry, and you'll very, very rarely find a job listing that doesn't mention one or the other or both of these. So it's really useful to get some of that experience. You also need just sort of general IT skills and be a tech-minded person. As I've said, coding is beneficial, but it's not essential. You can get a games QA job with zero coding experience, but it will help you to, read crash dumps and just really figure out how and why things might have broken on you. And then making your own small games, if you're putting together a CV or a portfolio to try and break into games QA, having some of your own little projects, even if it's just using a no-code games engine or following a tutorial, it'll be really useful to have that on your CV as well. And then soft skills are also super important for it. So communication, both written and verbal. So you need to be able to write concise bug reports. Obviously, you're well experienced in that already. And then attention to detail, confidence to raise issues and point out flaws to people who might be precious about their work. And then sort of a critical eye. So they're all things that, track across software and web and games QA, of course. So that, I think, just about finishes my talk. Hopefully we've got some time for questions. Hopefully we've got some curious minds in the room who might want to learn a bit more, and I've not scared you all away from games QA. Thank you very much.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Theo?
Go for it.
You talked about sort of the lack of automation around are there tools evolving to help with that at all, or is there is it a movement or tools that help support it?
It's mostly things that we build ourselves, really. Not me personally, but the sort of I could try. I could certainly try. We don't tend to use many sort of pre-made tools because the games are really sort of niche in their behavior. So programmers might add like debug tools just to help you out. I don't know if you'd exactly call it automation, but if you've got a large game world, you might have a debug tool to help you teleport around to different key areas, or spawn yourself in certain weapons or vehicles and so on. Automation is really lagging behind, to be honest. And then AI even more so. I know there's talk now of AI in software and web testing. And then there's we joke at work that it's going to replace our jobs, but we've not even been automated away, let alone AI'd away yet. So, yeah.
You mentioned Team 17, and obviously, as you know, in the industry, there's plenty more studios under that particular knife. Have you seen any positive like socio-political change in kind of your department in the wake of all these investigations?
Not particularly, because I think that stuff about Team 17 in particular, who I hope won't sue me for saying this, that came out when I was already at Red Kite, I believe. So Red Kite didn't need to change because it's just a fantastic company who treat their QA really well. So I couldn't really comment, to be honest. But then similar things have come out about TT Fusion, which is where I first worked, and they were one of the ones that have just a huge QA department sort of stuck in one room. Similar things came out about that. So I like to think that things are changing, but without being there on the ground, I wouldn't really know.
Sure.
Yeah.
How do you test sort of, I guess, I don't know how to explain it, but I imagine if you had a game that takes hundreds of hours to complete, so how do you sort of test that state? Because, I don't know, I'd imagine with changes and regression, it'd be very difficult to necessarily have, I don't know, a save file that you could load and stuff like that.
I think if a game gets that large, it tends to be at one of the companies that just have a massive QA department, to be honest, yeah. Rather than properly investing in sort of automation and AI, it seems that games companies just throw more people at these things.
Yeah, so sort of what it is literally brute force while you just play the game for 80 hours then. So.
Yeah, it can be. But I mean, if a game takes 100 hours to complete, usually we have debug tools that can cut that down a fair bit. So we might be able to just automatically complete a level and trigger everything that takes us out of that and into the next one, which can help with that sort of stuff. Yeah, mostly it is just, you just have to do it. Any more questions? Yeah.
Sorry, it's not really a question, it's more a point, if it's all right.
Go for it.
I just wanted to say, you said the thing that kind of made me sad about the fact that game testing doesn't really feel like you're giving something back, I guess. But I just kind of wanted to say that it really does to a lot of people, because like for me, it's my self-care. It's my way of staying sane.
Okay.
You know, so I just wanted you to be aware of that, because
All right.
it's genuinely really important.
Well, that's nice to hear. Yeah, that's what I try and tell myself as well.
I've worked for a lot worse places that don't really feel like they are giving back in that way. So, you know, and it is something very important to me in my career.
Yeah.
Whereas I would definitely be like, no, games testing is a positive thing. It is a force for good.
Okay. Well, thanks for saying that. Yeah, that's nice.
Well, you work on art, games, art.
Yeah, true. True. Yeah. But then it varies within games as well. Like there's some games that you work on where it's monetized really aggressively, and it's like this is sort of, it feels like it's intentionally gouging people's money. But then there's some which are really art, and you know, you can tell everyone really cares about it, and it's trying to be nice to the player and things like that. So.
Yeah, but I also find that a lot of the bad game experience come from a few people rather than.
Yeah.
I mean, not saying that, you know, absolutely yes, you're right that they don't treat all this stuff about everything, all of that. But yeah, generally, like, a lot of the negative stuff I've found has been the people playing rather than.
Yeah, very true.
You know, people being like, no, I have all this money, I'm going to spend it all on loot boxes and then kick your ass. I'm like, oh, great. Thanks.
Yeah, good point.
Rather than just buying more because you have that.
Yeah.
You know, it's true.
Yeah.
Do you get a chance to sort of feedback on like game balance or happiness of playing, sort of how it is like, or was it just like loads?
Occasionally, yeah, we do get to give a bit of design feedback. I think the best games companies are the ones that want that from QA. A lot of the time they don't. They just want you to stay in your lane and, you know, stay out of the way and just find the bugs. But I've worked at a couple of companies where I've been involved in design meetings because they want that perspective, which I think that is just to the benefit of absolutely everyone. So I don't know why they don't do that more often. There is basically there's a huge scale of, you know, companies that treat their QA quite badly and don't care what they think, and then ones who really do value them. So you just have to be really careful if you're trying to get into games QA and just sort of get a feel for the company and make sure you're going for one of the good ones. Yes?
Have you worked on many custom engines, and does it make your life a lot more difficult when you're working on a custom engine?
I've worked on a couple, yeah. Traveller's Tales, they have their own custom engine. because I wasn't super embedded in that one, I didn't really get to have my hands on the engine itself very often. I was normally just playing on the builds that it spat out.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to be careful now not to violate any NDAs, but at Redk, we worked for a company with their own engine, and it was sort of creaking and antiquated, but they were very proud of it and they loved it. So you kind of just have to put up with that, really.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you'll find yourself using Unity and Unreal, which are obviously very well developed, very well supported. So you won't have too many headaches in that regard.
Completely different question. You said you worked on Lego Dimensions. What was that like working with the extra technology that came with that? Because obviously you have they're not amiibos in that, are they? But they, similar thing.
Yeah.
With the scanning that in.
I've forgotten exactly the term that we used for them. I think we used to just sort of say like, oh, has anyone got a Gandalf? And then we'd get it. Basically, for anyone who doesn't know, Lego Dimensions was a Toys to Life game, they call it, which is where you plug a little pad in and you have chips, like actual physical little things that you put on that, and then they appear in the game. So that was like a really interesting challenge to play, or to test rather. Generally, the hardware held up quite well. It didn't ever like malfunction, and we weren't there sort of like unplugging it and plugging it back in to make it work. It was just a unique challenge in that you needed to actually get this physical thing from somewhere to get that character in the game that you needed, and it might be on the other side of the office, and someone's like, no, I'm using Gandalf to do this. So yeah, that was quite a unique one, quite a fun one. Mm-hmm.
With all the different like games companies in Leeds, is there a scene as well? Like, do you meet all the other games QAs and hang out and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's pretty strong, really.
Yeah.
There's not anything that's specifically QA.
Yeah.
There's nothing like this for games QA specifically, but the wider games industry, absolutely, yeah. So there's Game Republic, which is like a non-profit organisation which puts on events and things like that. The main one being a thing called GAMIO, which is shortened for Game Makers Yorkshire, which is like a twice a year sort of games industry networking event / party kind of thing that happens in Leeds. We also have a much more casual thing called Games Toast, which is just like a monthly meet-up on the last Tuesday of each month at the Water Lane Boathouse near the train station.
Yeah.
So you can just turn up to that, and there's people who do all sorts of different things, like students, professionals, people who do audio for games, all sorts of things like that. So yeah, if anyone wants to learn more about games and games QA, definitely come along to that.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Well, I think that's it. So you'll be around for the rest of the day, won't you, Theo?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, any more questions, give Theo a shout. He's really rad to talk to. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.